So now we come to the end of the chapter in the second encounter with the divine emissaries. It's interesting how the narrator begins this by simply describing this person with whom Jacob would wrestle as simply Ish, a man with whom he would wrestle. Again, we have the use of the nifal forms, both in the first verb. We begin with the vayiktol form or the preterite form in the nifal, as that he was there by himself. He was left alone, levado, by himself, and as he is there, so he's divided his entourage into the two camps, and then he is off by himself. And that evening, as again the sun had set, often again as Waltke describes, this setting of nighttime is a gloomy setting of difficult encounters, especially encounters with the divine. And so here he is alone, but it is in that solitary state that he will encounter God in a unique way. But this messenger from God takes the form of a human. And so, Vaye Avak, another nifal form for, again, wrestling. A man wrestled with him until the rising up of the dawn, you might call it, up until Alot Hashachar. That, again, through the night, Jacob wrestled. And when he saw, Vayar, Ki lo yakol, that he was not able for himself to effectively win the battle with this man, Ish, that Vayiga, the Kaf Yerakol, the Taka Kaf Yarek Yaakov, the Hey Avako Imo. In the wrestling process, he is injured by the hand of his thigh, so the socket of his thigh. So that again, the kaf is also the name of the letter kaf, which is the curled hand, the palm. So also can be used like the socket of the hip. And so here he is injured in the process, perhaps a dislocation that will cause him to limp for the rest of his life. He will, by this divine encounter, be physically affected as well as spiritually. And again, because of this encounter with that he dislocated Vateka, Kaf Yerek, socket of his thigh, and as a result, because of his wrestling with the emissary. So, it says then in verse, it says, let me go, for the day has broken, the dawn has come. Ki Allah Hashakar. And he said, do not stretch forth. Ki im barako. Unless you ki im, unless the combined particles ki and im, lest I be blessed. And so he holds strongly to this emissary of God in the form of a man requesting a blessing. And in the end, of course, Jacob receives a blessing a spiritual blessing, confidence about his future, but on the other hand, a physical antithesis of blessing, that which he will carry for the rest of his life. And then, of course, at the end of the story that we have in this encounter, a kind of secondary form of etiology that tells us at the end this is why the people of God don't eat the thigh. It actually would be a portion reserved for priests in the sacrificial system that's revealed later in the Pentateuch, particularly in Leviticus and in Numbers, Deuteronomy, portion that would be not for the common people, but for the priests. So this encounter with God will end with his receiving a blessing. His life will be delivered. He can have confidence in the blessing that will accrue to him as a result of his encounter with God. God will bless him in spite of himself, that he will bring a blessing for the future, but he will always be reminded of his encounter with God as he goes forth physically throughout the rest of his life, even to the point of the days when the journey to Egypt takes place later on in this generation. He will have a long life of struggle. From the beginning, the struggle in the womb, the struggle with his brother. But in the end, of course, we read in chapters 33 and 34 and following, the divine encounter, confidence in God's faithfulness will come forth in a good meeting with his brother Esau, of one whom he feared, reprisal. The end, God would bring the blessing even in the relationship through Esau. So, the history of Jacob, the deceiver, the struggle with God, but in the end, in chapter 35 that we'll look at next week in Unit 14, the blessing for the future, the manifestation in the land of promise, as he'll soon cross the river into the promised land, where the blessing of God in the future will be manifest.